I'm so glad that you've gotten to see so many of the things that you've gotten to see and already hear about today, from Bailey walking you through our discipleship pathway and just hearing about our heart for multiplication and spiritual formation, and for you to really understand what it means to be a part of the people of God, and then for you to get to hear from our Belgian friends and hear about our heart for the nations and to see the movement of Jesus not just spread to the city of Sandy Springs, but all over the globe. And then you got to hear from Jasper, who, bro, I just feel like I'm like the Walmart version of you, okay? Like, look pretty similar, but you're like way more buff, way better looking, and so way to set me up for failure, homie, okay? So, well, if you are new, you picked a great day to be in church. If we haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Joey, and my hope today is that you'd feel loved, wanted, and welcomed, that you'd find a place here to belong, to become, to be discipled, and to fall in love with Jesus like never before. My hope is that you would experience what those people in that video have experienced. That you'd experience a community where your joys could be doubled and where your sorrows could be halved. That you'd experience a community where religiosity could be eradicated and vibrant relationship with Jesus could be cultivated. That you'd experience a community where your atheist friends or your atheist spouses could have their questions answered, and they could see that Jesus is not a fairy tale, he is not a comic book story, but that he is real, and he's coming after you, and he wants to transform your life. And my hope is that you would find a community where you don't settle for a boring, dull, predictable life, but you step into a story. You step into the adventure of following Jesus and giving your life to become a disciple who makes disciples, who makes disciples, who makes disciples. That's my hope. If you're new, we are in the middle of a series of messages titled, This is Church. Let me hear you say, this is church. This is church. Touch your neighbor, say, this is church. This is church. Touch your other neighbor, say, this is church. And our hope is that in this community, you would find your people, and that you would know that church is more than a building, it's more than an aesthetic, it's more than a vibe, it's more than a preacher, it's more than some songs. It is a community, it is a family. Acts 2, 42 through 47, which Jasper read for our teaching text, is kind of the collection. It's a synopsis, a historical synopsis of what life was like with the first Jesus followers. That early movement of people who were Talmudeans, they were disciples of Jesus. They began to model and pattern and collect their life in such a way that it put the world on notice. They began to live life together, and in turn, it turned the world upside down. In Acts 2, 42 through 47, throw it back up there. It is this synopsis, this collection of the beliefs and the behaviors and the practices that they had that turned the world upside down. And Luke he's been on this investigation. Remember, he was hired out by a wealthy benefactor named Theophilus to investigate the story of the Jesus movement, to figure out how it is that they turned the world upside down and who these people were and what exactly they were doing. And so we see here that the early church set a rule of life or a rhythm for Jesus communities. And for the last 2 millennia, if you will study it carefully, you will see that connected to every major move of God, that there are these rhythms, there are these anchors, there are these practices that is core to that community as it's expressed around the globe, maybe with some cultural nuance or contextualization, of course. But you will see at the core that there are these habits, there are these rhythms, there is this way of walking, this cadence to walk with and rhythm to walk to that Jesus people have. And what we see, as we talked about last week, as we call it out, that they gathered in the temple, at the table, and in the town. At the temple, at the table, and in the town. The temple, the table, and in the town. And for us, this is church, the temple, the table, and the town. You see, Luke, interestingly, doesn't just tell us what the church was doing. He also tells us where the church was doing it. He gives us the environments, the settings, the venues that these practices took place in. As we talked about last week, they gathered in the temple or the synagogue, and this is where they would hear the apostles teaching. This is where they would sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. This is where they would hear the reading of the Torah and pray corporately and bring offerings and celebrate festivals. And this is where they would experience the thin space where the veil gets lifted and the space between heaven and earth becomes thin and the Spirit of God breaks in. That space that we experienced last Sunday at Elevate City Church, if you were here. Last week was one giant reminder that Sunday matters, that the gathering matters, that corporate worship matters, because what if the Spirit descended and you missed it? And I want for you to know that if you weren't here last week, you missed it. Can I get an amen, Elevate City? God did something in this house, in this room, in this space. People were met with the presence of God. People were set free. Ministry was done. Freedom reigned in this place. But they didn't just gather at the temple. They didn't just ekklesia in a building with a lot of people and with music. They also gathered in homes or at tables. And this is where they would break bread and share meals. This is where they would take communion or the Lord's Supper or celebrate the love feast, as it was called in the first century, which is very 70s, right? The love feast. But that's what they would do. They would get together and they would have their questions get asked and answered. This is where issues would get worked out and worked through. This is where needs were met and fellowship was practiced and life was shared and disciples were developed. It happened at the table. And as they gathered in the temple and at the table, this movement, it started to spread to the towns. You see it in Acts 2:42, that they enjoyed favor with all the people and they demonstrated the miraculous and they served the needy and they witnessed to the gospel, and God added to their number day by day those who were being saved. And so in this series, we're talking about the way that God uses the church for us to find him and find our people at the temple, at the table, and in the town. And today, we're gonna talk about the table of discipleship. If you're taking notes, you can write down that today's message is about the table of discipleship. Have you ever considered how much of Jesus' ministry happened around a table? One of the things that you might pick up on in Luke's investigation in the life of Jesus in his gospel is the theme of memorable meals. You ever had a memorable meal? One that you couldn't forget, maybe because of the company, maybe it was because of what happened at that meal, maybe it's because of the location or the spread, but all throughout Luke's gospel, we see Jesus has these memorable meals. Jesus engages with all sorts of people around the table. Jesus does some of his most profound teaching at a table. Some of Jesus' most memorable moments happen at a table. One Bible commentary says it like this. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is either at a meal, going to a meal, or coming from a meal. And there's never been a Bible commentary that made me want to be more like Jesus than that one, okay? Like, I love that version of Jesus. Jesus is trying to eat, y'all. He's trying to grub. And I love that about him. I love that it's just like from one meal to the next meal to the next meal, but oftentimes his life was spent at tables with people. From the dinner party at Levi's house in Luke 5:29, to reclining with the Pharisees and tax collectors in Luke 7:36, to the feeding of the 5,000 in Luke 9, or the hospitality of Mary and Martha in Luke 10, or the time spent in the home of Zacchaeus in Luke 19, or the Last Supper in the upper room in Luke 22, to the meal that he ate with his disciples after the resurrection in Luke 24. Do you see it? He's passionate about the table. You cannot underestimate the role of the table as a part of Jesus' ministry. Jesus knew one thing. He knew he had to get people to the table. It's been said that the most criticized thing about Jesus was not what he taught or where he went or how he interpreted the law, but the most criticized thing about Jesus was who he ate with. The people who he invited to sit at his table, tax collectors, Pharisees, adulterous women. Jesus pulled up a seat for them. Why would he do this? Why would Jesus take the flack? Why would Jesus get the hate? I think it's because Jesus knew that something happens at a table when broken, wounded, lonely, searching, hurting people sit around a table and they're not jostling for position and they don't have to clean themselves up, but they can come as they are and receive the grace of being human. Something happens in their hearts when you get beyond just shuffling around in the lobby or waving in the streets, but you say, no, come sit at my table that Jesus knew was powerful. And so over and over and over again, Jesus invites people to the table. And the early church seemed to have the same conviction. In a house, at a table, often over a meal, the church gathered for spiritual formation to happen. Watch. In Acts 2:46, they're gathering from house to house. In Acts 5:42, they gather house to house. Acts 8:3, house after house. I don't know why it changes there. Acts 10:2, Cornelius' house. Acts 12:12, Mary's house. Acts 16:30, the jailer's house. We're getting hood rat now. Acts 16:40, Lydia's house. Acts 18:7, Titus Justus's house. That's a ballin' name. Acts 20:20, house to house. Acts 21:16, the house of Manon of Cyprus. 1 Corinthians 16:19, Prisca and Aquila's house. Colossians 4:15, a Nympha's house. That's not a bawling name. And in Philemon 1:2, they're in Philemon's house. The early church knew that if you wanted to help people find God and you wanted to help people find their people, you needed to get them to the table. Look at this story in Acts chapter 18, verse 24. Meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus, and he was a learned man, so he knew stuff. He was educated and with a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. So like somebody taught him the Bible. He'd been instructed in the way of the Lord, so he'd even been taught about Jesus in some regard. And he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately, though he only knew the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained the way of God more adequately. According to this passage, there are things in your discipleship that can't be learned in seminary or even by just reading the scriptures by yourself. They have to be learned in a home. Have to be learned at a table. The early church knew that for people to become fully formed disciples with a full picture of the ways of Jesus, they were going to have to invite people into their homes, into today's table. You know, I've got one goal for my message today. And I don't know if you can guess it or not. It's pretty straightforward. It's for you to get to the table. I want today to just evoke something within you, unlock something inside of you where you understand that until you pull up a seat at the table, you aren't experiencing church. I want for you to begin to prioritize the table, for you to value the table, begin to learn to love the table, see your desperate need for the table, for you to understand the church is not the church, the ekklesia is not the ekklesia without you consistently gathering with other people around the table. I want for you to think for a second about your own table. I want for you to think about maybe what your table looks like that at your house. Maybe it's your dining room table or your kitchen table. I want for you to hold that image in your mind. And I want for you to think for a second about all of the life that has been shared around this simple piece of furniture. I bet as you think about your table, I bet you think about some friends that have been hosted at that table. I bet you think about some meals that have been shared at that table. I bet you think about some stories that have been told around your table. Maybe some board games that have been played at a table. I bet you think about some tears that have been cried at a table. Some big life decisions that have been made at a table. Oh, the power of a table. If your table is anything like mine, then it's maybe, drawn on with markers by little kids and stained with red wine and scuffed up from many, many moves. But oh, if this table could talk, oh, the stories it would tell. Man, I've had a couple of burnt meals served to me at this table. I cooked them myself, okay? My wife has never cooked a burnt meal, but I've eaten some incredible meals at this table. One time, our parents, they were on a trip to Maine, and they flew in a lobster to us, like back home, and we ate a lobster at this table. So if you ever go to Maine, fly me in a lobster, okay? I'll enjoy it at this table. But it's not just the food that has been consumed at this table, it's the relationships that have been formed at this table. I have sat at this table with countless young couples as we've done premarital counseling. And so this table has been a place where I've talked a lot about spiritual leadership and what it means to lead your family and to be a pastor of your home. This is a table that I've sat at and I've talked a lot about communication and how to actually listen to your spouse and learn to speak their language. This is the table where we've talked about bong chicka wah wah. It's my favorite premarital session personally. Been a lot of prayers that have been prayed at this table. Times that we've prayed for barren wombs of women who struggled with infertility or miscarriages, because that's such a big part of our story, and we've been able to pray for them and put hands on them and cry with them. And there's also been a table where people have made the announcement, I'm pregnant. And we've gotten to celebrate. And this has also been the table that we've sat with people at who've said, I've lost my job and I don't know what to do. Or they've uttered the words, I don't know if I believe this stuff anymore. There's been a table that we've opened the Bible at, and we studied the Bible and dissected the Bible and really tried to dive into the deep end of what God's word means and what it means for our life. There's a table where I remember one time we were doing Bible study, and this young dude, he just didn't even know anything. He was like, hey, I found this verse in the Bible the other day, and as opposed to pronouncing it correctly, the book of Titus, he said, I found this book in the book of Titus. That's not okay, buddy. But that happened at this table. Oh, if this table could talk, the stories that this table could tell. I wonder what kind of stories your table would tell. I wonder what is happening at that little piece of furniture in your home. My friend Sean reminded me that science seems to indicate that eating food at a table with other people is sort of like God's love language. You ever think about that? Like one writer points out that we have over 10,000 taste buds, and the volume serves almost no evolutionary function. The only specific explanation for why we have so many taste buds is that God must really love us. How good is that? So the next time that you sit down at a table and you eat a burrito and you can taste like guac and queso, I want for you to think, God, you really love me. But moments like that, man, they happen at a table. Did you know that as a people, as a society, we are losing the table? The average family eats together less than 3 times per week. The frequency of family dinners has gone down by 33% in the last 2 decades. Even families who do eat together, 83% of the time it's in front of a television screen. This one blew my mind. 60 years ago, the average dinner was 90 minutes. Today, it's less than 12. We are losing the table. In The Atlantic, sociologist Cody Distilleray explored the most recent scientific literature regarding the impact of the family dinner table. What he discovered about the simple act of breaking bread together is powerful. He reports that the single most important element in raising kids who are drug-free, healthy, intelligent, kind human beings is frequent family dinners. Data tells us that regularly sitting down together at the table is also the most important predictor of success for elementary-aged children. The primary factor in shaping vocabulary for younger children is frequent family dinners. And the key variable most associated with lower incidence of depressive and suicidal thoughts among 11 to 18-year-olds is frequent family dinners. If you don't believe the scriptures, just trust the science. Eating together at a table is powerful, but man, we're losing the table. And I wonder if it's possible that as we lose the table, we lose the art of having deep relationships and henceforth lose the practice of discipleship. Leonard Sweet says, if we were to make the table the most sacred object of furniture in every home, in every church, in every community, our faith would quickly regain its power and our world would quickly become a better place. What would happen if you reimagined how you started thinking about the table? You know, early on in the Christian movement, that Christianity didn't take shape behind pulpits or on altars or in books. It took shape around a table. As people sat, meals were shared and conversations took place. The first century Christians, they didn't just stare at the backs of people's heads. They looked each other face to face. The story is clear. They broke bread in their homes, eating and drinking with other believers, brothers and sisters in Christ, together around a table was as consistent a spiritual practice in the first century church as maybe any, maybe more than any, as important as it was to go to synagogue for teaching or temple for offering or into the city to be a blessing. It was to get to the table for communing. The table is so central throughout the narrative of Scripture. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. From the very first command in Genesis, where God is telling his people, do not eat from this tree. You make tables out of trees, for if you do, you will surely die. But then he gives this other command, eat freely of everything else, Genesis 2:16. And at the very end of the story, Revelation, drink freely from the water of life, beginning to end. The book covers, it's about the table. One theologian said, I can sum up each testament in 3 sentences. Each testament in 3 sentences. The Old Testament, they tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. And that's pretty much the story, right? Battle after battle after battle after battle, they survive, and then it's like, let's throw festivals, let's eat. The New Testament, I love you, I forgive you, let's eat. Old Testament, New Testament, guess what? You gotta get to the table. You know the story at the end, this whole story at the end, when it all wraps up, it ends at a table. After every battle has been fought and every sin has been dealt with and every wrong has been made right, according to Revelation 19, the place we will gather together is the marriage supper of the Lamb. We will gather around a table, meaning if you want to see heaven come to earth right now, get to the table. You want a little taste of heaven on earth? Get to the table. When I say you have to get to the table, what I'm saying is you need an environment where you can experience legitimate discipling relationships, where you can experience oikos, where you can experience family, where you can be vulnerable enough and real enough and have a place that is consistent enough for you to actually change. A place where you can not just like theoretically know about Jesus, but deeply know Jesus. And a place where you can not just talk about kind of maybe following Jesus, but where you could passionately start to follow him and begin to practice life the way that he practices life and organize your life in his patterns and his ways and do the things that he did, and where you can learn to be a leader, learn to be a multiplier. You need a table. More than a table is a place to share a meal. It's an axiom for a place to share life. The table can take many forms. A basement can turn into a table. A backyard can turn into a table. A coffee shop could turn into a table. Wherever there are a group of people who have dedicated their lives to God, to one another, in pursuit of becoming more like him and leading others to do the same. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about a table. And the reason that I use table is because we're talking about something more than study. We're talking about something more than head knowledge. We're talking about more than just going through the motions of like reading a chapter. We're talking about life, real life together at a table. I would contend that there really is no table like an actual table. There's just something about getting in someone's space, getting in their world, seeing where they live, eating where they eat, that is powerful. There's something about space and a place where you can practice unreasonable hospitality, a place where you can pull up a chair for people who don't have one, a place that is not so hurried and distracted, but where you can let your guard down, where you can, as my dad used to say, take your shoes off and stay a while. There's something about a table. If you're struggling to develop like real, genuine friendship in your life, I just want to tell you, like, get to the table. Like, if you have a group or a Bible study or a discipling relationship and you're like, we're kind of talking about some of the nuances and like we're getting really deep on some theology, but you don't experience that like sense of real community that you're longing for, I'm gonna tell you, introduce food and watch what happens. Like, people come out of their shell when you give them a taco. See what I did there? Shell, taco, come on. Goodness gracious, people. But watch what happens as some food starts to get put out. You start to see like a different side of people. Like, all of the posturing and pretending and the trying to look cool comes down real quick when you got a chicken wing in your mouth. And no one looks cool. No one's got swag with a little sauce on their face. No one, right? You get to know people real quick around a table. You know, one of the problems that exists in our modern world is that very few of us have the kinds of relationships that are deep enough to be transformative. I'm gonna say that again. I'm probably like say it 3 times. One of the big problems in our modern world today is that very few of us have the kinds of relationships that are actually deep enough to be transformative. So we know this. We know that we're the most interconnected generation of all time from a technological perspective, but we are deprived of deep, vulnerable, I see you relationships. And you need that. You need a place that is safe enough to let your guard down if you're actually going to experience transformation in the deep part of your heart. That's why you got to get to the table. The table is a place to be known. The table is a place to be heard. The table is a place to speak, a place to listen, a place to care and be cared for, a place to confess, and a place to hold accountable. The table is a place to ask questions, a place to process, a place to be challenged, a place to pray and be prayed for, a place for healing, a place for honesty, a place to be encouraged, a place to be inspired. That's why you have to get to the table. At the table, you serve with your unique gift. And at the table, you feast on what others uniquely bring. At the table, you carry others' burdens. And at the table, your burdens are carried by others. This is why you have to get to the table. If you want to really experience the beauty, the power, the glory of Jesus, of his bride, the church, then you can't just get to know her in the temple. You've got to get to know her at the table. Hey, introverts, look right at me. I know you're stressed. Get to the table. I want you to know that the solo spiritual journey is a modern invention. The idea of you just doing Jesus with your own latte and your moleskin Bible in some hip coffee shop with whatever playlist you like and your favorite internet preacher is not discipleship. You need the table. Hey, extroverts, look right at me. Talk less. Talk less, smile more. Okay, no. But talk less, learn to listen, learn to ask good questions, but get to the table. Regardless of personality type, get to the table. All right, I'm about to put an intensely long quote up on the screens, okay? intensely long. But this quote is it, okay? Like it is so, so good. And if the reality of this could seep into your soul today, if something could permeate our house, where we caught a vision for this, it would be stellar, okay? So Joseph Hellerman, in his book, When the Church Was a Family, recapturing Jesus' vision for authentic Christian community, states this. I'm gonna read the whole quote, okay? Spiritual formation occurs primarily in the context of community. Persons who remain connected with their brothers and sisters in the local church almost invariably grow in self-understanding, and they mature in their ability to relate in healthy ways to God and to their fellow human beings. This is especially the case for those courageous Christians who stick it out through the often messy process of interpersonal discord and conflict resolution. Long-term, interpersonal relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. Don't miss this part. People who stay grow. People who leave do not grow. We all know persons who are consumed with spiritual wanderlust, but we never get to know them very well because they cannot seem to stay put. They move along from church to church, ever searching for a congregation that will better satisfy their felt needs. Like trees repeatedly transplanted from soil to soil, these spiritual nomads fail to put down roots, and they seldom experience lasting, fruitful growth in their Christian lives. Then there are those who leave to avoid working through uncomfortable or painful relations with others in the church family. Running away does provide immediate relief from the awkwardness of a hurtful relationship. It is the easy way out in the short term. And there are legitimate reasons to leave a local church, but persons who leave to escape the hard work of conflict resolution are often destined to repeat the cycle of relational dysfunction with another person in another church somewhere else in town. It is a simple but profound biblical reality. We grow and thrive together, or we do not grow much at all. The deep stuff, the really deep stuff, it gets worked out at the table. Most of your pains, our deepest pains in life, are relational wounds. It's someone did something to us that hurt us, betrayed our trust, and now being around people is just so exhausting because we feel so wildly afraid that we're gonna get hurt again or let down again. And so it pushes us deeper into isolation and deeper into isolation. And everything in the American message and psyche is feeding this message of rugged individualism. Of you're your own person and you do your own thing. And it's pushing us deeper and deeper and deeper into isolation, thinking I will just work out this in my head. But here's the truth from all of psychology and throughout the whole of the Bible. Our deepest wounds happen in relationship, and so likewise they must be healed in relationship. It's the only way that it's gonna happen. Our deepest pains get worked out at the table. The trauma from your family of origin, the bad habits from a dysfunctional upbringing, the self-sabotaging tendencies, the unhealthy coping mechanisms that you developed in childhood, the fears you can't shake, the lies that play on repeat, the insecurities, the anger, the shame. You want it to lift? Get to the table. Get to the table. That's the place that it happens, where you work it out in relationship with other people, in the messy crucible of long-term relationship. Now, listen, pastors, we tend to romanticize community. I know this. Like, I'm trying to get you to the table. And so I'm trying to talk to you about how awesome it is, and how transformative it is, and how powerful it is. But I want for you to know, it's pretty messy too. Because messes happen at tables, right? Awkward things happen at tables. It's a blessing, and at times it's a burden. It's wonderful and painful. It's miraculous and sometimes really, really mundane. Some days it feels like a lifeline, and other days it feels like a chore. I want for you to know that some good stuff happens at the table, but some weird stuff happens at the table too. People chew with their mouth open. People put their elbows on the table. Some people put ketchup on their tacos. Caden Dolmage. Yeah, that man puts ketchup on his tacos. Should we excommunicate him? Should we excommunicate him? Weird stuff happens at a table. But you know, people can be weird at a table, but really it's just preparing for life. Because life is weird, and messy and unpredictable and all over the place. And so it's actually in the integrating and doing life with others that you learn the subtle art, look right at me, of getting over yourself. Do you know one of the great graces of the table when you have to interact with all these awkward people who like don't know how to have good conversation, and you're like just playing 20 questions with them, and gosh, they're strange, and they don't know that they're dominating conversation, and everybody's like, I don't care about Aunt Susie, you know, like get on with it, bud. But they can't read the moment, they can't read the room. Everybody's been here, right? If not, you've never been in a church small group before, okay, ever. But let me tell you, it's the burden of community is actually the blessing of community, because it's teaching you the subtle art of getting over yourself. Everything in our world is trying to tell you that just make life about you. How's that going? Wildly lonely and extremely disappointing. But you get to the table and you'll find that it's difficult and that it's hard, but it's worth it. Here's what I'm trying to say. It's at the table that we're actually able to set the table for people to really encounter Jesus. It's at the table that we're able to practice the almost 100 one another's of scripture and so prove to be the body of Christ. It's at the table that people can get a glimpse of Jesus by having a meal with us. Listen, ultimately, Jesus himself is the feast. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Come to the table and taste and see that Jesus is good. Jesus says, I am the water of life, a spring welling up, and those who drink of me will never be thirsty again. But often it's when people encounter the person of Jesus at the table and radically share life with others that they're never the same again. I want you to know that our strategy for reaching this city is not for people to listen to Joey's sermons, okay? Your unsaved friends are not going to listen to my hour-long sermons, okay? Do you know what our strategy is for reaching the city? It's you. It's you. With a heart full of love, radical love, and unreasonable hospitality, creating space, consistent space in your week where you open your table and you serve good food and you put on a ballin' playlist. And you spray some good smelling stuff, and you sit there, and you're so real, and you extend a grace, and you pray prayers, you talk about the Jesus stuff, and you do it again, and again, and again, and again. And when you look around and there's an empty chair, you think about, who do I need to bring to the table? That's our strategy. Some of you think that you're too busy for discipleship, and all I want to ask is, are you too busy to eat? Are you too busy for a meal? Are you too busy to sit down at the table? Are you too busy to put on your calendar and protect at all costs dinner at the table with Jesus people? Breakfast at the table with Jesus people. Just put it on your calendar. As the pastor of this church, I don't want to just build a crowd. I'm not interested in attracting attenders. I'm not interested in catering to consumers. There are so many incredible expressions of the body of Christ in this city that if that's what you want, you're going to probably be more at home in one of those. But I want you to know you're going to miss it, because this is the stuff. There's more, so much more. The stuff that you were created for, the stuff that you ache for, the stuff that you long for. Doesn't happen in rooms like this. It happens at tables like that. Loneliness gets eradicated at the table. Orphans get placed in a family at the table. Atheists get to ask all their curious questions at a table. Sin cycles are defeated with time-tested battle tactics at the table. There's a place where people pray for you until God comes through, and it's at the table. You got to get to the table. Real talk, I turned my garage into a playroom so that more people could sit at our table. We saved up money for years to transform our backyard to create an outdoor backyard place where people could come sit at our table. Almost every Monday, I go to lunch with Pastor Joe and Pastor Thomas to reflect on what God's doing in this community. And we sit around a table and we tell stories about you guys. Some of them good, some not so good. I set aside every Monday night to have the same couples from our church over to our house and sit at our table for the last 4 years. I wake up at 4:45 a.m. every Tuesday to sit with 3 other guys and do deep multiplicative discipleship around a table. And in 6 months, they're gonna create a table and they're gonna do the same. Once a month on Sunday nights, we have our pastoral staff and their families over to our house to tell stories about what God is doing, ways that he's moving. Thank God for all he's doing. And we share a meal and sit around a table. And roughly once a week, oftentimes more, a different couple from our church preparing for marriage sits around the table with Kayla and I. We cook them a meal. We talk about the Jesus stuff in the context of marriage. And here's the reason that I'm telling you all of that. I'm not asking you to do anything that I have not aggressively and radically woven into my life. I'm pleading with you. I'm telling you from experience. This is it, y'all. Get to the table. In the lobby as you exit today, there are going to be a bunch of, you guessed it, tables. And they're going to tell you about the tables of this house. The places that we'd love to pull up a chair for you so that you can be formed into the image of Jesus. We are not just trying to build a crowd. We're trying to start a movement. And that's when people get connected into these communities where they experience the Jesus stuff in such a way that they say it's too good for me to keep to myself.